Our top stories tonight. Cabinet shakeup imminent. President Park Geun-hye may nominate a new prime minister as early as this Monday, signaling the start of a cabinet reshuffle. The Korean won rises to its strongest level in nearly 6 years against the greenback, and it's taking a toll on the nation's exporters. And clashes at Pakistan's largest and busiest airport leave more than 20 people dead after militants armed with grenades stormed into a cargo area. Early edition begins now. It is 5 a.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in Karachi, and 6 on Monday, the 9th of June here in Seoul. Hello, this is Early Edition at 6. Live from Seoul, I'm Moon Gon-young.
And I'm Daniel Chen. Thank you for joining us. We begin at the nation's top office. President Park Geun-hye, who has promised government restructuring and sweeping reforms in the aftermath of the Sewol-ho ferry disaster, hasn't yet announced her new pick for prime minister.
Right, following the controversy over her most recent appointment, the president is believed to be going over the potential candidates with a fine-tooth comb. Our Choi-sun reports.
President Park is thought to be seeking a reform-minded figure with ethical integrity to be her next prime minister.
국가 개혁의 적임자로 국민들께서 요구하고 있는 분을 찾고 있습니다.
Nearly 2 weeks after her first nominee, An Dae-hee, resigned amid controversy over privileges he received after retiring as a Supreme Court justice, the president has yet to announce her new pick. It's believed the presidential office has tightened its personnel verification system. When asked Monday if the nomination process is back to square one, spokesperson Min Kyung-wook said that the verification process could be a variable. The announcement will likely come no later than this week, since President Park is scheduled to leave for Central Asia next Monday. To avoid a further delay in the anticipated cabinet reshuffle, there's speculation that the nominee, before being confirmed at a hearing, could play a part in recommending a new cabinet to the president alongside current Prime Minister Chung Hong-won. With the replacement of the presidential press secretary over the weekend, a reshuffle within the presidential office may be gaining momentum. On Saturday, the spokesperson said it was not certain which senior secretaries were subject to replacement, but that a verification process was indeed underway and new names would soon be announced. After the departure of one of the president's closest aides and former press secretary Lee Jung-hyun, observers are now focusing on whether Presidential Chief of Staff Kim Ki-chun will also step down. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
Now, as the country slowly recovers from the recent Sewol-ho ferry disaster, and now with the local elections over, the Korean government says it's putting all of its focus on spurring the economic recovery. Arirang News Yoo Ri-an explains.
이번이 마지막이라는 생각으로 어렵게 살려낸 경제 회복의 불씨를 더욱 크게 살리고 우리 경제의 재도약을 이끌어서 대한민국의 희망을 만들어 갈 것입니다.
President Park Geun-hye has put economic revitalization at the top of her agenda, and she's vowing to pour all efforts into carrying out her 3-year economic innovation plan announced back in February. The first part of the 3-part plan is public sector reform, which has been under the spotlight since April's Sewol-ho ferry disaster. A major step in the public sector reform is cutting debt levels at public organizations by tightening lax management. With the reforms in place, the debt-to-equity ratio was dropped to below 190% by 2017 from the current 220%. But since the government came under fire for mishandling the ferry disaster, the focus has shifted to rooting out corruption and cracking down on cronyism, or so-called parachute appointments. Minimizing government regulations is another major goal laid out by President Park. She had wanted to get rid of 1/5 of all government regulations by the end of her term in 2018. But some pundits say this goal will be hard to meet, given that the ferry disaster was blamed partly on a lack of safety-related regulations. Senior government officials say, however, that they will continue to take out unnecessary regulations. Finally, President Park has vowed to create an innovative economy. Helped by the government's drive to promote startups, the number of newly established businesses in the first quarter this year exceeded 20,000 for the first time in 14 years. The government is also looking to provide assistance to businesses in every stage of growth. Yurian, Arirang News.
The dust from last week's local elections has settled, but it's no vacation time for the nation's rival parties. Now, over the coming weeks, they will have to select a new party leader and also gear up for by-elections in July. As our correspondent Kim Young-gi reports, with the local elections ending in a virtual draw, next month's elections have taken on greater significance.
With the campaigning over and the races decided, the ruling Saenuri Party and main opposition party now face a slew of challenges ahead. The ruling party plans to establish a new committee to reform the government's overall management system in the wake of April's ferry disaster.
We expect a new prime minister and new cabinet members. To coincide with President Park Geun-hye's upcoming reshuffle, our party is considering plans to restructure itself.
The Saenuri Party will also hold a party convention on July 14th to nominate a new leader. Meanwhile, the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy also said it would do its best to regain the public's trust.
After the June 4th local elections, what people want is social integrity, a system of checks and balances, and a safer Korea. We will work towards answering the public's demands.
Both parties will also be trying to rally the troops ahead of July 30th by-elections. They are considered important as the number of National Assembly seats up for grabs could be as high as 18. 10 former lawmakers gave up their assembly badges to run in local elections, while 2 lawmakers lost seats for violating election laws. Another 8 more seats could be available as lawmakers are awaiting rulings on other charges. Political analysts say the outcome of the by-elections could serve as another barometer of public sentiment on the heels of the local elections. The ruling party currently holds 149 seats in parliament and needs just 1 more seat to resume its majority status at the 300-member National Assembly. Kim Young-gi, Arirang News.
Nearly 2 months it's already been since the Sewol-ho ferry sank off Korea's southwestern coast, taking with it more than 300 people. Now, around-the-clock search operations, which have encountered a number of setbacks in recent weeks, continue today. And with more favorable conditions in the area since Sunday, 2 more bodies have been recovered. Our Kwon So-hwa with the latest.
The number of missing is shrinking, and the number of confirmed dead is rising. With waters around Jindo Island in the southwest of the country at their calmest on Sunday, rescue divers recovered a male body at around 11:30 p.m. from the 4th floor of the sunken vessel. It was identified through DNA testing on Monday as a Thanwon High School student. A female victim, identified as a Thanwon High School teacher who had stayed on the ship and saved 19 students, was retrieved on the 3rd floor cafeteria of the ship Sunday morning. The government's disaster response headquarters has decided on a 3-step plan for recovery operations moving forward. Up until the 20th, divers will continue to search the cabins. After that date, remotely operated vehicles and sound navigation and ranging methods will be used for harder-to-reach locations. Additional equipment designed to ensure that bodies aren't carried out of the ship by currents is also expected to be installed. Meanwhile, the trial for the 15 crew members of the Sewol-ho ferry who were indicted last month for abandoning the passengers on board will begin on Tuesday in Gwangju District Court. 4 of them, including Captain Lee Jun-seok, are charged with homicide by willful negligence. Kwon So-hwa, Arirang News.
South Korea says it's working with Thai authorities to secure the release of 13 North Koreans who were arrested in Thailand while trying to defect. An official from Seoul's foreign ministry said Monday that the South Korean embassy in Hanoi is looking into the matter. They believe that would-be defectors will be released and allowed to transit to a third country following an investigation by Thai authorities. The entirely female group, which includes 2 children, crossed into Thailand after passing through China and Laos with hopes of finding asylum.
A recent flurry of diplomatic activity by North Korea with its neighbors has fueled hopes of getting North Korea back to the negotiating table for the first time in more than 5 years.
Right, so for more on the possibility of that happening, we are joined live in the studio by our Hwang Sang-hee. Sang-hee, let's start with North Korea and Japan mending ties. Now, what does this mean for trilateral cooperation between South Korea, U.S., and Japan in its dealings against North Korea?
Well, for the most part, Japan's individual dialogue with North Korea centers on the issue of Japanese citizens abducted by the North. But Japan has promised to lift its individual sanctions on the North once the reinvestigation into the abduction issue begins. But rather than affecting Tokyo's trilateral alliance with Seoul and Washington, many say this will reduce Pyongyang's dependence on Beijing. But because Japan has been very transparent about its interactions with North Korea leading up to its agreement, experts say from now on it's important that Tokyo maintains behind-the-scenes consultations with Seoul and Washington.
Now, Sang-hee, we know that Chinese President Xi Jinping is due for a state visit to South Korea in the coming months, and North Korea, of course, will be at the top of their discussions between Chinese President and President Park Geun-hye. Should and will South Korea ask China to do more to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table?
Well, China certainly has a huge influence on Pyongyang as its biggest economic benefactor. 90% of North Korea's trade is with China, was with China last year. But when I asked that very question to Joel Witt, former U.S. official and North Korea expert at Johns Hopkins University, in my recent interview with him, he said Beijing's role doesn't stretch as far as we think. Let's take a look.
So I think there are limits to how far China will go. And I think we need to take it upon ourselves to figure out how to solve this problem. We can't rely on China.
Now, this means South Korea and the United States should take a more proactive role by holding their own talks with North Korea. They should keep China informed, but not act as the middleman anymore. We also have to keep an eye on North Korea's blossoming ties with Russia. Now, Russia has been moving rapidly to cozy up with North Korea in response to the West's sanctions stemming from the Ukraine crisis. And for Pyongyang, the relationship means it can gain leverage over its dependence on China. Experts say this opens up another chance for dialogue.
Russia and North Korea's mending ties are an appropriate step toward the resumption of dialogue, because Moscow could convince Pyongyang to return to the six-party talks.
Well, the chief nuclear envoys of South Korea and the U.S. Last week they met in Washington. We were talking about changes. Are they showing any change in their joint stance, Sang-hee?
Not really, Daniel. Seoul and Washington just reaffirmed their joint stances that six-party talks will not happen unless North Korea takes practical steps for denuclearization, which would start with the freezing of its nuclear development program. Now, some experts are critical that the two countries are sort of drifting away from dialogue efforts and focusing entirely on beefing up their defenses against North Korea.
Well, even if the talks resume, there are more questions left to be answered. The key question is, will the six-party framework, as it is currently, be effective in denuclearizing the Hermit Kingdom?
Well, experts do remain divided on whether the six-party talks format has passed its expiry date. In my recent interview with him, Victor Cha of the Center for Strategic and International Studies said that the six-party framework is still the most valid form to tackle North Korea's nuclear ambitions, while Professor Joel Witt said a new form of dialogue could be considered.
But the six-party format is also important because it ensures that whatever agreements are made between the U.S. and North Korea are reaffirmed in the six-party context to ensure that, in particular, the North Koreans comply with the agreement.
So much time has passed since we've had a real dialogue with North Korea that it may be worthwhile, rather than clinging to the past, that we do a total review of where we are, where we're going, and how do we avoid the consequences of a North Korea with a growing stockpile of nuclear weapons.
But of course, most experts do agree that maintaining some sort of communication with North Korea is better than having no communication at all.
Sure. I mean, keeping North Korea engaged, definitely not an easy task without giving them the impression that they are being rewarded for bad behavior. So definitely not an easy task there. All right, Sang-hee, thank you so much for that report.
My pleasure.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life, talking with you on air and online, connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best with Moon Gon-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
The South Korean currency rose to its strongest level in nearly 6 years on Monday. Analysts say the trend comes at a bad time, especially because Korea's exports to major economies, China in particular, are already suffering. Our Na Yeon-kyung has more.
The European Central Bank's easing of monetary policy has driven the Korean won to strengthen even more. On Monday, the local currency rose 0.4% from the previous trading day to close at 1,016.5 won against the greenback. Experts say this is not a positive development for local exporters.
I think that $1 exchange rate has reached its threshold, with the ECB lowering its benchmark interest rate. The euro is likely going to join the weakening currency trend of the Japanese yen and Chinese yuan. Those will bring down the price competitiveness of Korean exporters even further.
With the Korean won also hitting its highest level against the yuan in nearly 3 years on Monday, analysts add the strengthening trend will send jitters to Korean exporters, especially because shipments to China are slowing. Korea's exports to China fell by more than 9% in May from a year earlier, and things are not likely to improve if the won continues to rise. As for the possibility of the won strengthening past the psychologically important 1,001 mark before the end of September, analysts in Seoul have mixed opinions. Many are not denying the likelihood, but they also suggest the local currency will weaken in the fourth quarter, given that the U.S. economy is on a path of recovery, which could lead the Federal Reserve to raise its key interest rate and strengthen the dollar. Na Yeon-kyung, Arirang News.
Foreign investors are snapping up more and more stocks on the Korean bourse, but they are flocking to one conglomerate in particular, Samsung Group. And all pointers suggest this trend will continue for the foreseeable future. Our Song Ji-sun tells us why.
Samsung Group is attracting foreign investors to the Korean bourse. Over the past 20 trading days, when Korean retail investors were sidelined, foreigners remained net buyers, pushing the benchmark Kospi index up by nearly 3%. Data released by the Korea Exchange on Monday shows a quarter of all shares bought by foreigners over the past month were those of Samsung Group companies. Foreigners now own more than 35% of all listed shares on the main bourse. Corporate analysts attribute the spiking Samsung share price to the group's improving profitability and the need for the children of Samsung Group patriarch Lee Geun-hye to continue speeding up the succession process. Analysts say the rise in Samsung shares accounted for a third of the 3% gain in the Korean market's capitalization in the past month. Samsung Electronics has been the main target of recent purchases by foreigners, who now control more than half of the company. The tech firm now accounts for 18% of the main bourse's total market cap. Foreigners kept buying Samsung shares since Samsung chairman Lee Geun-hye was hospitalized in May following a heart attack, on hopes the group's ongoing reorganization and transfer of the company's control to Lee's 3 children could yield capital gains. In a move widely seen speeding up the succession, Samsung SDS and Samsung Everland recently announced plans for initial public offerings by next March. After their IPOs, Samsung Group affiliates could account for over 30% of the market capitalization of all listed companies. Experts say the bullish foreign buy will continue in the near future, given their preferences to invest in safer companies like Samsung, coupled with expectations Samsung will benefit from the U.S. economic recovery. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Account Moodys among those that think the Korean economy is well on the path to recovery. The International Credit Ratings Agency said Monday that Asia's fourth largest economy will grow around 3.5% to 4% this year and next on strong exports. Moodys tempered the expectations a bit, though, saying that Korea's heavily indebted public firms and households may have a negative impact on the domestic economy. They also cited the impact of April's ferry disaster on demand. It added that Korea's aging population could weigh on the longer-term potential growth rate.
Now, Pakistan's busiest airport was the scene of a deadly battle between security forces and armed militants Sunday. At least 20 people and as many as 27 have been confirmed killed, and there are reports that gunfire has resumed at that airport. Our Shin Se-min reports on the initial assault that began late Sunday evening, local time.
A well-coordinated attack by a group of terrorists at Pakistan's busiest airport that has killed at least 20 people so far is apparently not over. Security forces in Pakistan say they relaunched a military operation at Karachi's Jinnah International Airport hours after claiming they had regained control of the terminal under assault. Pakistani airports have confirmed that 28 people were killed, most of them airport security personnel. The terminal was no longer being used for commercial flights, only for cargo and special VIP operations. But a spokesman for Pakistan's Civil Aviation Authority says thousands of people, including airline staff, passengers, and members of the airport security force were present when the terrorist attack began. Police and army officials say a group of 10 armed gunmen initially entered the airport using fake IDs, and at least one aircraft was destroyed in a gunfight that involved machine guns, grenades, and a rocket launcher. As of now, all operations at the terminal remain suspended, and all flights entering the airport are being diverted. The Pakistani Taliban has officially claimed responsibility for the deadly attack. They say it was carried out in response to the death of its former chief who died in U.S. drone strike last November. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Back here in Korea, a nuclear reactor was temporarily shut down Monday afternoon after a problem was detected in one of its 48 control rods. Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power said Reactor Unit 1 at Hanul Nuclear Power Plant in the southeastern county of Ulsan was turned off manually so they could investigate the cause of the malfunction. This is the fourth suspension this year of a nuclear reactor in Korea, which depends on its 23 reactors for about 30% of the country's electricity.
Now, for all of you Psy or Snoop Dogg fans out there, the global sensation's long-awaited collaboration with Snoop Dogg has finally dropped, and the 5-minute music video for Hangover, which hit YouTube earlier today, has it all.
Well, we're treated to the duo taking drinks to cure their hangovers, eating kimbap, steamed white rice rolled in sheets of dry laver seaweed from a convenience store, and singing in a karaoke room.
Right, so basically a lesson from the rapping pair in Korean drinking 101. And we already know that the Korean pop sensation has what it takes to make a smash hit. Of course, last month, Gangnam Style officially became the first music video to pass 2 billion views, 2 billion on YouTube. But is Hangover the song to set a new record?
Well, some say he could be a one-hit wonder, but I strongly disagree. And this new music video and the new song, of course, great collaboration of the two guys who don't take themselves seriously, but they are serious about music. And some might say this is, toilet humor, or it's not very intellectual and whatnot. But it takes geniuses to come up with something this silly, ridiculous. At the same time, it promotes Korean culture.
Well, only time will tell whether this will be a big hit or not, and whether Psy Fever will be sweeping the globe this summer.
Well, you're right, but speaking of summer, it already feels like one definitely here in Korea.
Well, let's go over to Michelle Park to find out if the warm weather is here to stay. Michelle, so is it going to be Psy Fever or just feverish weather out there?
Well, I don't know about you, Kanyang, but I find that new music video pretty funny. But as for the weather conditions today, temperatures did rise about 5 degrees from yesterday in the central region also, although there is places getting rain right now. Now, there is rain in the forecast all week across the nation, and tomorrow it's expected in the capital and the southern regions with the warm highs in the upper 20s. Now, after the rain tomorrow, more precipitation is in the forecast nationwide on Wednesday, which will bring down the highs a bit, and the rain will continue in the east coastal region on Thursday and Friday. Now, going over to our temperature readings, Seoul will top out at 19 before reaching up to 28 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will peak up to 24 and 22 degrees. Now, moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops out at 23, Dokdo at 19, while Mankungang tops out at 17. Well, that's all for me at this hour. And back to you guys.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you for watching. For our viewers in Korea, have a wonderful rest of the evening. This has been Daniel Che.
And I'm Moon Geon-young. To those of you in other parts of the world, have a great start to your day. And we hope to see you right back here, same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.